An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. And one of the reasons I wanted to share that from Dr. King is because part of what's going on in Israel in the book of Judges is everybody is only concerned with their individualistic concerns. So you remember the kind of the overarching theme that's the mindset of the people. You find this in chapter 17, verse 6, and then the very last verse of the book in 21:25. They're quoted verbatim. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That is, their individualistic needs were more important than the greater community and more important than God's community. And these are God's people that we're talking about, right? These aren't the pagans living in Canaan. These are God's people, right? Those verses apply to. And then you'll get a little bit more of just a reminder of that in chapter 18, verse 1, and then also chapter 19, verse 1. So we started at the end of the book last week. The very last verse is where we started, and then went back to chapter 17 and 18. And what you see in 17 and 18 is what we're going to see in 19 through 21. 17 and 18 form one story that's congruent, and then 19 through 21 also form one story that's congruent. But the overarching idea is this: it is me before we, and then who gets to decide what's right. So in every culture, every community, every society, somebody decides what's right. In those days, everybody decided what's right, which means, guess what? Nobody decides what's right. And chapter 17 through 21 is, as I've called them, the appendices of the book of Judges that really show us the heart of God's people and show us, I'll give you the $2 word, show us religious syncretism, that is, bringing in the ideas and philosophies of the culture into God's covenant. This is Greg's take. I suppose that if you ask people in those days, do you think you're doing right? You know what they're going to say? Absolutely. My way and my way of seeing things is the right way. So I'm going to do it my way, and I'm right, and I'm justified in doing so. So we looked last week at a story of an unknown Levite who was a preacher looking for a job and took one and then found a better one and caused a big ruckus. And then tonight, 19 through 21, we'll also look at another story with an unnamed Levite, which in the movie version, the title of my movie is The Levite, the Concubine, and Civil War, which are all related. And so, go ahead. Yeah. So, and there's no commentary on right or wrong. There's just here's how it is, right? So the writer of Judges or the compiler of Judges doesn't give us any moral fix here. Just showing us, which is why I wanted to start at the back before we go to the front. This is what's going on in the hearts and minds of people, and in the writer of Judges' mind, there is no fix. It's left undone. Right? The book ends on a very sour note. Right? It doesn't wrap itself up in this nice, pretty package. There's no resurrection story here. Right? It's just the heart of people and where we are. And so, part of my take on this is, if you want to understand what humanism is, this is humanism. That you become your own God. You get to decide what's right. You get to chart the ethic, and you get to chart the moral compass. And you know what? Nobody's going to do anything about it because they got their own. And if I'm stronger than you, or you pay me more, I'll go be your priest for this other group. And that's so. If you'll let me paraphrase a bit of the story of 19 through 21, it's a hard read. If you're watching online, it's graphic. So The story's graphic, and it's just all but incomprehensible at times. But so we have a story of another Levite. It's interesting that the Levites are chosen to show the hearts of the people, because of all the people around, the Levites are who form the priesthood. The people who ought to be the most attuned to God in that economy and in that time frame are the people who are at the center of the most chaos. That says something to me. God's leaders have lost their compass too. It's not just the people. It's not lay people. These are God's chosen leaders that are to help serve the people in their relationship with God. So another unnamed Levite. So if I'm taking the title, we'll start with the Levite. Just like the other story with the Levite starts with a confession and a reconciliation, this one starts with a reconciliation as well. So a Levite has a concubine, and I'll explain the concubine in just a minute. They split up, depending on what you read. If you read the Tanakh, the Hebrew, they split up because she's unfaithful. If you read the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, she leaves because she's mad at him, and probably he did something wrong. Anyway, listen to me say, they didn't go see a marriage counselor. They probably did no pre-marriage counseling, and they have split up. In those days, you could not divorce a concubine. So, like the writ of divorce that Moses did for a wife. So she goes home to dad. Now, the beginning of this story seems like a little sweet love story. Oh, they had a lover's spat. She ran home to dad. He's going to follow her. He's going to make nice, and everything's going to be good. So he does that. He goes home. Dad insists that they reconcile. They have a big party. He says to stay. Dad says to them. The Levite senses something, I'm going to guess. There may be a little competition for young lady's affection. Dad wants her to stick around. It would be very profitable for Dad for her to stick around, by the way. Get another, household servant. Especially then if he sticks around, well, you got a Levite. You got a preacher. Apparently it was good to have your own personal preacher back in those days. The Levite chooses not to stay, but wants to go back to his home. So he's from Ephraim, goes to Bethlehem, leaving Bethlehem, going back up to Ephraim. And is that right, or is it the other way around? I forget which story. On his way, he passes by Jerusalem, or Jebusite, which is occupied by a Canaanite people known as the Jebusites. The Jebusites stay in Jerusalem, by the way, until David moves the capital, King David, from Hebron up to Jerusalem many, many years later. And interestingly enough, it's getting close to dark. He's a Levite. The general law towards Levites from the book of Leviticus was you needed to be hospitable to Levites. And the procedure was, when you get to a town, go to the city square. The town people go, oh, he's a Levite, let's bring him in. Right? That's how it's supposed to go. They're getting close to Jerusalem. It's getting close to evening. There's a suggestion that they stop at Jerusalem or Jebusite. His ethic is a bit misguided, but he says, oh no, those are where those bad people live. The Canaanites, the Jebusites. There's no way that we, God's people, could go in that town and stay. And even if hospitality was offered, it would be pagan hospitality. We can't do that. So again, we're looking at the initial story seems to be okay. So he passes on Jerusalem and ends up in Gibeah. And he goes to the square, and nobody comes to meet him. No hospitality. Listen, I'm guessing the Gibeahs, the Gibeahites, whatever they are, don't care much for preachers. Right? Yeah, they can. Yeah, they can go south. Yeah, look, we already got stories. Listen, they're just going to go to the best. They're going to go to the bigger church with the better check and the better benefits. They're not going to stay with us. So nobody sees him, which is very much against what Torah would have said in Leviticus, to show love to strangers, and some other places. And as it would happen, an old man, again another unidentified person, an old man. I think it's important that we get the old man part of that. Those who should know better, right? Wisdom, have lived a little life, have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not the movie, but life itself. Maybe the movie too. So he's neglected, the Levite's neglected in Gibeah, but the old man, who is not from Gibeah, but there has a vacation house there, I guess, he takes him in. Good. Story's still looking pretty good. So you got reconciliation. Good. You got some discernment. We don't want to go to the pagan place. Good. You got hospitality. Okay. Everything's great, right? Good story. Let's end it right there. Let's go home. It's not how it ends. So you get a very Sodom and Gomorrah feel to the story now. Newcomers show up, knock on the door. It's not DoorDash bringing you supper. It is townspeople asking for the Levite to be abused sexually. And I think there's more to it than just the sexual morality here. I think what's going on is, look, we do things the way we want to do things around here, and we don't take kindly to strangers coming in, and especially preacher types, and we want to humiliate you. So my take is their plan is to drag him outside, to sexually assault him and assault him on the city square. That's what they're going to do. The old man's appalled by that. And just like we get in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when the angel shows up and they knock on the door and give us the angel, there is a strange offering. Don't take the guest. Take my virgin daughter, the old man says, and take his concubine. And again, I'm thinking, what? And there's one of your other ethical questions there. No resistance. Are they going to beat? They got torches in their hands. What? The Levite steps in. Okay, maybe he's going to step up and do something. He basically pushes his concubine out the door and says, "Here, you can have her." Apparently has a cup of chamomile tea and gets real relaxed and goes to bed. And the townspeople do to her what was intended for the Levite, sexually assault her, physically assault her, and leave her for dead on the doorstep of the old man's house. And just unthinkable, right? Remember, everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. Probably justified. Let me introduce to you the concubine, and I'll get to what happens next. And what a concubine is. That's a strange word in Hebrew. It's a strange word. It's got some very nuanced meaning. Sometimes a concubine is what you get, for example, in the Sarah and Hagar saga. It's a servant who offers, sexual pleasure. So that's applied. Sometimes it's about a harem, in a king's harem, concubine is. In this case, it doesn't. And sometimes it's a second wife, so polygamy is permitted. In this case, it doesn't appear that he's otherwise married. It appears that she is his wife. He's called her husband. And so, if I can, without being too politically incorrect, she's a second-class wife, which makes her worse than a second-class citizen, because, in the hierarchy of the patriarch, misogynistic world in which they live, it was man, possessions, including cattle, first wife, legal wife, and then concubines. And slaves, sometimes it was slaves, first wife, concubines, depending on who you talk to. Anyway, someone who is of low standing in the community, and how Israelites became concubines of Israelites, if they weren't captive people, which happened a lot, is usually because of debt. Somebody got in debt and couldn't pay the debt, and so you gave up your daughter to satisfy the debt, and in exchange that the man would take care of your daughter until the debt was satisfied, or heirs are born, or whatever, because heirs were important too, because that was labor and workforce. So she already is a place of low standing in the community. She could have been a victim, depending on, again, how this translation reads of why she left, of something already from the husband. She's definitely a victim and the object of abuse in Gibeah. It's a sordid tale, right? It's awful. It's who would do that? And apparently the Levite just slept through it all, right?
Gideon was like the drop name.
Yeah. Yeah. These are all God's people, right? These are not foreigners. These are God's people. And so she definitely is an object of abuse. So the Levite wakes up the next day and she's on the doorstep. If you read it, it's all as if he stumbles over her and tells her to get up. Like nothing happened, right? We got to get going. We got to go back home. There's dinner to be cooked, clothes to be washed, and she's non-responsive. So he throws her on the donkey and goes home. Well, apparently there is a twang of consciousness that's going on when this word gets out of what's happened. An assembly is called, and justice is sought because the Levite's been wronged, because his concubine's been abused. I find it interesting that nowhere in this account does the Levite admit to his own complicity of what happened. He conveniently leaves that part of the story out, right? These bad guys knocked on the door, and she ended up outside, and she's ended up dead. And so what he does to get the attention of the nation is he chops her into pieces and mails her out to all the tribes and says, look what happened to my concubine. It's just, that's his call for justice, by the way. You do get something, not with humans, but you get something similar, I think, with King Saul, who sends out animal pieces, right, to the tribes. This was a call for justice of some sort. So Israel gathers together to go get justice, which is really ironic that in a society which seems to have no moral compass, that this is the hill they're going to die on. Okay, this is their rallying cry. Maybe they needed a common enemy, right? So they go back to Gibeah. They ask Gibeah for the perpetrators. Hey, just give up the guys who did this. We'll take care of it from there and call it good. And for whatever reason, they say no. These are our people. And I think in their own way, what they said is what they did was okay. She's only a concubine. And he's a Levite, and he's not from here. We didn't want him here anyway. That's why we didn't bring him in. So they don't surrender the violators. And so now some battle lines are drawn. And the civil war happens. Israel rises up against their own people. There's some really interesting things that happen, though, in this war. There seems to be a repeated petition to God to see if it's okay. And it seems to be that God says yes, Now I have a little bit of heartburn with that. I do think what's happening because of how this is written is we're just told that God said okay, and we're not really sure that God really said anything. There is the appearance of doing it right. Before you go to war, you go to God, right? And there is the appearance of, oh yeah, this is okay, which, by the way, that happened with the Danites too, back in the other story in 17 and 18. Israel attacks. Benjamin, they're fierce and they're apparently really good with slingshots, and they have some initial success, and then they're finally overcome. There's some overconfidence and some trickery and some strategery, and the city's destroyed. Gibeah gets destroyed, and the tribe of Benjamin is almost wiped out. And I think all, by the way, under the guise that this is God ordained. They take out their own people, and then they have another twang of consciousness. Wait a minute. If we kill them all, we kill a 12th of us, right? We kill a piece of us. Well, they're killing everybody, right? Mass genocide here. I mean, they're killing men, women, children, cats, dogs, cattle. It's a whole burnt offering. 600 left. Well, what in the world are we going to do? There's only 600 left. We can't let the tribe go. We got to get them wives. So let's commit some more atrocities and make it right. So everything is wrong under the guise of making everything right. So the people who just wipe the Benjamites out decide to make it right, so they justify something, right, to perpetuate the lineage of, and they go start stealing women. And they ransack another place, and they take revenge on a city called Jabesh Gilead, because apparently the people from Jabesh Gilead didn't join the war. They were conscientious objectors. Hadn't heard that word since the 60s, probably, right? And they didn't want to get their hands dirty with this messy stuff, so they get wiped out, and women get taken away. But there's not enough, so we got to go find some more. So we just go steal women, and that's the solution, right? That's kidnap them, and that's make it right. So as I say, two wrongs, still wrong. It's a messed up world, isn't it? That you get in there. And so the question is, and this is where we can start chatting it up, is there any hope? The question is there any power on my computer? Because it was just about to go out. Is there any hope here? You read Judges 17 through 19. There's no mention of a moral corrective. There's no mention of God really intervening. There's an allusion to, I think it's false. Is there any hope here? And what all is at play in Judges 19 through 21? It's gruesome, isn't it? And we think we could never put up with that. Would we? Would we put up with something like that? Such moral atrocities? Could our moral compass be that far off? And is there any hope that sexual abuse and raping of women and wiping out societies under the name of God would be okay? It doesn't set well, does it? So there's some things that before I get to the hope question, that I just want to touch on. there's no doubt in my mind that in this story, especially, that women are presented to us as a symbol of the brokenness of society. They don't count. They don't matter. And unfortunately, it's not till in the history of Israel, it's not till Jesus comes along where they really begin to matter a little bit. But even then, it's a long time before women are considered to be human and to matter. I think Jesus is the first great feminist, especially you read Luke's gospel. And in male-dominated, patriarchal, misogynistic societies, it is easy to go down the road of abuse, isn't it? We've seen it in the Middle Ages, and we've seen it in our own country. And so I think that part of this story is that it just speaks to the brokenness of humanity and how we look at gender and how we look at others who aren't from our place. And remember that Leviticus would really call us to honor gender and to love the stranger and to take them in and to be hospitable. Yet we don't see that. I think there's also an indictment in this on the institution of religion when it gets away from God. God's nowhere in this picture. God's name is mentioned. God's name is maybe even invoked. God's nowhere in this picture in the hearts of His people. Now, again, this is general. I know there's, like every society, there's bound to be some good ones in there, you hope. But this is what happens. Religion becomes then, if nothing else, the excuser of abuse and oppression, if not actively a part of it. And I don't think we're exempt from this today. So I'll ask again, is there any hope? Because when I look at our world today, you're going to say, Greg, we're not that bad. Are we? Is there any hope today? And what I think, and so again, I call this humanism. It is that we decide what's right and what's wrong. Each of us. And just go. Yeah, Brandon.
And saying that we're not that bad, we've rationalized, well, we're not sending out our daughters to be raped, and we're not cutting up women, and we're not, but calling ourselves good is just as bad. I mean, we've lowered the bar to where, well, we're not that bad, but are we seeking God in everything we do? You look at the story and how messed up it is. I mean, they tried to justify it, and it seems like, okay, well they're going to rectify it and punish those guys. Well, what if they go send out a bunch of virgins to,
They end up doing the same thing that they accuse the people of doing, right, in their own way, or at least they're complicit in it, right?
And that's part of the danger of being okay, being a good person. We're not excellent. We're not striving for God. We are living in this first world society that everything's good. So we're good with ourselves, and we're not doing anything completely grotesque. But at the same time, we're depending on ourselves and not dependent on God like we should be.
Yeah, we begin to put our hope in things like institutions, in governments, in educational systems, in markets, And we define the good life on those terms, right? We got money in our pocket. We got a peaceful, relatively peaceful world. Relatively peaceful world. Yeah, that's the good life. And if our hope is in that, then our hope is our ultimate hope is in humanity. And I still think humanity is redeemable. Okay, I'm not, but I don't know that we're that far off from this. Yes, the atrocities that are committed here, we would be appalled by, I hope. But there are other atrocities that we commit, and I think Brandon brought up something that's really poignant in our world, and that's comparative righteousness. I'm better than you. At least I don't do. At least we don't throw our concubines in the street to be sexually assaulted, right? We don't offer up our daughters as an appeasement for vile behavior.
We abort about 4,000 babies a week.
There are things that we do in our society that we tolerate, right? That
Social norms.
yeah, that become social norms. And so I do think the whole point of the latter part of this book, and the reason there's no bow on it, and it's not cleaned up, and it's not pretty, is to show, now these are God's people we're talking about, okay? These aren't the pagans, these aren't the non-believers, these aren't people who, hate God. These are people who claim to love God, who follow the Shema. And listen, it didn't take them long. And so which one of the questions that I started with when I started this is what happens to society when me becomes more important than we? That my way is more important than any other way or the way. That my ethic is the guiding ethic without any bumpers. It's a strange time in the history of Israel, because even in this tale, you have these moments of ethical clarity, don't you? Oh, we can't go to the Jebusites. Oh, we don't want to give up the stranger that we were hospitable to. Oh, we've got to go get justice. There's been an atrocity committed, and so you have these moments.
So we're not upset with God.
Yeah. And where do they end up? Where do they end up? So I'll ask the question again. Is there any hope for these people? Is there any hope for us? Maybe that's the question.
Well, the hope is they're still God's people.
Right. So underneath this mess that we read about in Judges 17 through 21, there is still a God who's still at work, who's still trying to redeem a very messed up world. Right? And I wanted to start here to get to that point so that when we go through the cycle of Judges, you begin to see how God intervenes. At the end of the book, you don't see it. Right? All you see is a bunch of messed up people, and our first reaction is, how can they do this? We get really appalled by it. We get offended by it. It's a grotesque story in so many levels. But then we have to step back and look at ourselves and ask, how many times do we embody Judges 21:25? in those days there was no king. Everyone did. Nobody's telling me what to do, by the way. I mean, nobody's telling me what to do here.
Because in this particular, in these two chapters, it's God's people versus God's people.
Right?
The offenders and the offended
Yeah.
are the people
Yeah.
God promised.
By the way, and who's God going to redeem?
Yeah.
Certainly not the people from Gibeah. But, oh, well, who's God going to redeem? What fascinates me about this book is it ends there. It ends dark. It ends making you think about what in the world is going on in our world. And is there any hope? So I thought it would be better to be a buzzkill at the beginning of the study, not at the end. And so the plan is next week that we'll start in the first chapter. I'll spend a week in the first couple of chapters, and then what we'll do is we'll thematically look at the judges. And I got no timeline on, so we won't go chapter by chapter by chapter necessarily. We'll just take the judges as they come up, look at their character, look at the oppression, what's going on, how does God intervene, what's the redemptive act that happens, explain some, look at repentance. Speaking of that, I do think that underneath all this, in 17 through 21, is a call to repent. It's not expressed, but there's a call there because it just makes you kind of have that nasty knot in your stomach when you read this. Right? And I do think that this is not unlike our time in our own way. It's not unlike when Rome fell and what was going on in the Roman Empire. But any time that we think and put ourselves in a position that we're more important and we cut God out, and that begins to permeate communities, it's going to be a rough road. It's going to be a rough road. And I think that by and large that we have turned into a very humanistic society in our own way. And the call is to see God at work, for God's people to see God at work and to join God in that work. All right, other thoughts you got about that? It's kind of this is a gut wrencher for me. These chapters are, and they make me look at my own ethic and my own compass and my own justification for my behavior and my own, leanings to use comparative righteousness. I can always find people that I'm better, right? I can always say, well, at least I don't do this. Or I can always, say, well, I prayed about it. Must be okay. God didn't stop me. So, other thoughts about this that you want to explore?
Last chapter, Israelite, all Israelites, they lost two battles. They fought to the war. The Lord said, go ahead and do it. The other thing is defeat.
Yeah, so the Benjamites seemed to win the first couple of skirmishes, right? Yeah, so I think what happened is that's why I think that God's really not listened to or not consulted in the right way. Or it could be like, so in the conquest story in Joshua, remember when they go to Jericho, they're it's a whole burnt offering, right? Don't take anything with you. Nothing lives. And then Achan then took the gold and or the household items, and then they go to Ai and get defeated. Hey, God, you said we're going to win. We're going to win, and then so there's sin in the camp. So obviously that's why I said that two wrongs are still wrong. What they're doing, right, is so one of those questions: is this justifiable civil war? They go in the name of justice, and then all but annihilate their own kin folks, right? And then act unjustly to make things just. So, in my opinion, Ed, that they're calling on God is a farce. It's not sincere. It's, yeah.
Like when a dad tells his son to go ahead. I mean,
Yeah.
go ahead. And like the dad sits back and knows the consequences, but he knows the son's got to face it himself. So the son's got to destroy himself. I mean, a good father probably knows when to do that. A good father does know when to let his son face consequences. And he'll approve it.
Right. Or he won't stop it, right? Yeah.
He'll say go ahead.
Go ahead. It's a good thought. So, yeah, it's just a messed up scenario, and the call for us is a call to repent and to wake up and to put God back at the forefront of our thought process. Right? That not to do what's right in my eyes, but to figure out what God desires. And really be discerning about that. There's no discernment here either. Got a bunch of reactive things going on, and nobody's thinking about what's tomorrow going to look like. And, I know we've got to live in the moment, but we do have to be discerning about what this moment's going to look like 10 minutes from now, and tomorrow, and next month, and those kind of things. All right, what else? That's 45 minutes of gore and bad news, so. It does get better at times, Judges does. So, and there's some interesting characters. Flawed, by the way. All flawed. And we will, there's some ethical dilemma. There's some moral tension in these stories of the Judges that I want us to explore when we look at the characters and kind of unpack those, and how we justify actions, and so we'll start at the beginning next week and plow through Judges. So we'll keep coming back to the last verse over and over again as a reminder. So, all right. Anything else? So if you didn't get the blast today, I did want to tell you that Don Holt passed away this morning. So as soon as we get some information and what the family's going to do, we'll let you know. We'll send something out about that. So let's keep them in our prayers, and got lots of folks in the hospital, and both in our church family and in our families in our church family. So praying that we can get this COVID thing out of here so quickly. Anyway, glad you're here tonight, and hope you have a restful night after I've filled your head through a bunch of atrocities. So